Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining the day two of the Global Energy Justice Action Week, GJL 2025. Thank you to everyone who joined us yesterday. And yeah, your participation made a fantastic start to the week. So yesterday we have a powerful conversation around the terminology. Today we're gonna to speak more about the structural barriers and everyday life that related to energy injustice. So before we start, for those who new to this webinar series, I would like to briefly introduce this event. And yeah, let me just share my screen now. Uh, Screen, okay. Oh, that's amazing people. Okay. Uh, So the Global Energy Justice Action Week 2025 is follow the traditions of the International Energy Poverty Action Week 2022 and 2023. So this year we focus on all five different themes around terminology, perspective, global north, global south, uh, and the future solutions. So this webinar series is mainly supported by the Generator project based at the University of Manchester, and we also collaborated closely with a huge group of our partner organizations here. Huge thanks to all of you. And this year we have invited 30 guest speakers from all over the world. Thank you to all of you. And yeah, thank you finally to all the participants that joining our this fantastic webinar series. So today's chair will be Maria Cornelis. Maria, you might want to introduce yourself. So I will now hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. So my name is Marine Cornelis. I'm the executive director and founder of Next Energy Consumer, which is a policy consultancy focused on the social dimension of the energy transition. And yeah, I'm really delighted to be joining this Global Energy Justice Action Week after rebranding and a little pause. But thank you very, very much, Lynn, for making all of this happen. And it's really good to see so much interest from all of you for these sessions. And I'm sure we'll get even more as today's and every day of the week webinar is recorded. So please feel free to refer to it and to send it to your friends and colleagues who may find it interesting. And so the focus of today, it's really on the energy injustices at home, which is particularly important given the season and the time we're living in. At policy level, there are so many important things happening, like the focus has moved from, let's say, a global level to maybe a home level. And we will focus on the structural barriers and really the everyday realities that shape energy injustice inside the home. So the conversation in a nutshell is about poor housing, aging or inadequate infrastructure, gendered responsibilities, and unaffordable energy bills, because they reveal something much larger. It's that the domestic energy hardship sits at the intersection of personal struggle and political choice. So this session will be examining how these injustices are lived, how they are narrated, and they will be kind of addressed in different contexts. Our speakers will draw on frontline accounts and real-world cases to show how energy hardship is embedded in broader system of inequality and how more inclusive and context-sensitive responses can emerge when we pay close attention to lived experience. So, as I said, and as Lynn said, this session is being recorded. And for the format, I will introduce each speaker. and guide the transitions between the presentation. And our four speakers will have made their presentations, we will open the floor for questions. So please feel free to really to write your questions in the chat as we go along, because it's going to be very rich and intense. So you need to be alert. So our today's speakers, there are four. We have the unique and wonderful Stefan Pozarski, who's like the godfather of the topic for all of us. So thank you, Stefan, for being with us today. Stefan is from the University of Manchester. We have Neil Simcock of the Liverpool John Moores University. Hi, Neil. We have Paola. Sorry, Paola, I have a hard time pronouncing your surname. Damashka, right? Damashka.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
perfect. So Paola Damashka from Jelena Energetska Zadruga says in Croatia, right? And we have Catherine Sugar from the University of Manchester. We have quite a nice representation of the University of Manchester, but these speakers, they have experience from like everywhere. So no worries. I'm sure they will bring us everywhere we need to go. So thank you so much. It's 14:10 here in continental Europe, so 1:10. And Stefan, you have about 20 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Brilliant. So thank you for that very generous, very kind introduction. And I'm just very happy to be here. Very delighted that we'll have an opportunity to talk about these very challenging, very difficult issues, but still on the agenda, and still very important. I will try and share my screen now to see if it works. So I don't know if you can see my presentation.
Not yet.
Can you see it now? Oh, wait, let's have a look. It's not letting me do it. Let's try again. Sorry, it's not letting me do the share. Let me try one more time. Apologies. Sometimes it can be temperamental. So, PowerPoint, let's see. Is it working now?
Yes,
Yes.
Oh, okay,
labors of love. I
fantastic.
love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stefan. We are here.
Super. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, it's I want to talk about something that's called community care work. That's the term from a recent UN Sustainable and so UN Social and Research Center report, which just came out a few days ago. And sort of bring together a range of studies that we've done with colleagues over the years, and also some of my own work that's hopefully maybe going to lead to a book that I'm currently writing on this. I have to say this is a collaborative, all of this is collaborative. So I'm sort of the presenter, but I've got to mention lots of people here. Some of them are on the panel, like I can see Catherine and Neil here, but also people like Amy Crowther, Lilia Karpinska, Matt Jembla, Claire Houlihan, Harry Quealy. More recently, also the team at basically the European Institute for so energy and climate policy. So lots of people have been involved in this, and it's just in and I should say lots of NGOs as well. So it's always a collaborative effort. And I'm just trying to sort of bring this together in the context of work and labor, which for me I think is important in the context of the energy crisis. And I should also say that this work is also taking place in the context of two research centers that I'm involved in. One is the Just Center, recently established, recently launched. So the Just Center is the Joined Up Sustainability Transition Center, and then also the Energy Demand Research Center in the UK. And at Manchester, also the organizing team for this week is part of the People, Place and Energy Research Center, which is like a Manchester thing. So it's all kind of different structures, which I feel I should mention because they have been very supportive of the work. Right, so my work is around the notion of energy assistance, and in the context of the energy crisis and the climate crisis, I won't talk about the climate energy crisis so much. I only want to say something that I feel like there's this idea of permacrisis, which is that we're in a constant state of crisis around energy and climate. And that's kind of my argument here. People say there's an energy crisis as a result of the post-pandemic recovery and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So all of those, of course, have created a huge price increase for everyone, and that has had effects on things like energy injustice, energy poverty, and so on. But more broadly, there is an energy crisis around capitalism and a climate crisis around capitalism as well. So one of the processes through which this crisis is being abated, both in terms of supporting people who are vulnerable or who need help in the context of a crisis, but also in terms of addressing housing upgrades, is this context of what I call energy assistance. So energy assistance basically is any form of support that people um, get from intermediary organizations to address housing upgrades, to address energy injustices, to include also consumption patterns and so on. Energy assistance is also something broader. It's basically a system of subsidies, a system of support, it's a system of grants and so on, which I'm not going to talk about. So there is that kind of programmatic aspect of energy assistance, and then there is the social aspect of energy assistance, the what I call the community care. And I'm interested in that element of energy assistance. And later, Catherine will talk about energy advice, which I see as a kind of subset of energy assistance. I guess you will talk about that, Catherine. I think it's also part of our project in EDRC. So one of the issues with energy assistance is that why we had it really is that when you are doing any kind of energy efficiency upgrade, when you're undertaking any kind of support for people who have multiple needs, that is a socially, politically, materially, economically complex process. And it is maybe to some extent work that would have formerly been covered by the state. Now, the third sector has come into that space a lot. Also, partly also the private sector, but primarily the third sector, and I'm talking here primarily in the global north. Um, and there's been lots of criticism of that development. People saying that when with the third sector taking on the roles of the state, that it's a kind of parastatal activity, that some say it's kind of shadow work and so on. Um, which in fact then the criticism is that that erodes itself the ability of the state and of the public domain to assert its steering role over these domains of these competencies. Um, so that with that happening in that sense, there's also a kind of counter argument, which is that while that is the case, of course, that's the context. This intermediation that we're looking at, um, does two things while also delivering those interventions, that community care work. It also influences policy processes towards pulling them back further away from in that direction that they're going, in that direction of neoliberalism. So it helps influence and shape the process in that regard. And also energy assistance, and we have seen in multiple projects, it helps build social capacity, social relations, emotional well-being, material well-being as well. So I want to talk about this because I think what we have seen in this energy assistance sector, particularly with the latest crisis, latest incarnation, is an explosion of work in this domain. And it's work that is unmapped and under appreciated, under theorized. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take a sort of a broader view and understand what's happening, primarily in this type of work as a form of energy labor. Um, and in that sense, also, my argument is that it's not just a form of labor, but it's also a form of social infrastructure. So it's a new form of infrastructure that is not physically there, but it's materially there. And sometimes it's also physically there. And it's a kind of infrastructural labor that involves all sorts of things. It involves economic intermediation, it involves care, it involves emotional labor, it also involves placemaking. And it's kind of a reparative labor. So it builds cities, it builds places from the inside almost out. So from the homes outwards, because it's very much focused on the residential sector. So we are looking at a vast new geography in that sense of reparative interventions, which are happening everywhere around us, but are not necessarily always visible. And as such, they change the nature of the energy system itself. So um, just a very basic count. We were able to count over 200 providers in the UK, and I just in a different survey managed to capture around 1,000 globally. So there's a lot of these providers, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I should just say that some of this work I've tried to, and in collaboration with others, tried to sort of pin it down in a few papers that are publicly available. Some of them all co-authored again with the people in this room. Um, so, for example, this notion of energy justice intermediaries, or the mapping of energy advice that we've done with Catherine as well, and Neil has been involved in the work on energy justice intermediaries. And just 2 days ago, I had this focus article published in Professional Geographer. It's available. Basically open access, and it's about this idea of infrastructural labor and solidarity and what it actually does in the energy crisis. When I collected all this data, I sort of put it in a word cloud, and it was kind of interesting what came through um, in that word cloud, what the central word was, and it's actually home. It's kind of interesting. So basically, this is the textual data from all of those providers' materials, just sort of put into one and just see what frequencies of words we get. Obviously, things like saving and bills and grants and fuel and support, all that is there, but home is the central thing, and that's kind of interesting because underneath it is the kind of the making a homemaking process. And one of my PhD students, Manon Burbage, I don't know if she's on the call, but she's done some really interesting work on the idea of home unmaking through energy crises. And I think this is the opposite of that. This is the process of homemaking for people who are struggling to assert that autonomy due to the lack of services in their home. So, or even when they want to upgrade the home to improve its thermal performance. Again, it's a different kind of homemaking. So there is different ideas of how home is being made and unmade in this, and but I think it's really central. So it's more than just assistance or advice or anything like that. And there's basically five different functions that it does, this work. So it's about switching and moving from different types of providers in different types of energy services. Often it's about communication with providers. And that can be not just energy providers or retrofit providers, but a lot of other ones. It's about payments, so managing people's budgets and payments in the future. It's about referrals to other services, and it's also about material support. And material, I mean actual physical support in the home, which might happen as well. Um, so in that sense, what I've been arguing here is that this whole process creates a kind of a new resource. Um, so when we think of resources, we think of coal and oil sometimes, or I don't know, nuclear, or wind, something like that. But we don't think of this as a kind of a resource, the resource that is created through the labor of energy assistance. Um, if we took it very strictly, it could be something that's called a negawatt. But the negawatt sometimes have negative connotations because of its commodification. So it's not necessarily a negawatt in that sense, but it's that sort of resource as a kind of, I don't know what to call it yet, that we can have a conversation, but the bringing in of support and assistance to people who need it or people who want it or require it in different ways allows them not just to save energy, but to improve their livelihoods. So this is kind of a different debate that we could go into because it's not necessarily something that's captured in official statistics. And sometimes, when we have these projects, we are asked to, and I know people in this room might have that as well, you're asked to provide a number for how many kilowatt hours are saved as a result of intervention. So this comes into that, but it's not just the kilowatt hours, it's a lot of other things that are saved. And I can go into the different details of how this resource is created. I think it involves six components around, primarily not just around the domain of social reproduction in the home, but also around contesting and mediating within existing systems, but also recovery and extraction of resources in the sense of reduction and so on, and regulating energy. So it is a resource that's not acknowledged through this labor, that's created through this labor. I just want to kind of give you an example of also the collective dimension of this. Again, Neil might say a bit more because we've been involved in that. Previously, we were involved in work, and these are photos from one of those projects when we had these energy cafes. There are also repair and retrofit cafes which do similar roles. And so it's not necessarily just a process of working within the home, it sometimes goes out into the community. And in that sense, when it becomes into a community element, it actually has a more powerful agentic capacity in a political sense and allows for knowledge sharing. It was interesting when we ran these in the pandemic that online spaces were not so conducive to them. And it might have changed now, given that so many things are online, but there is the moment of digital exclusion in that sense. So the material presence of these collective forms of support is very important, particularly when they allow for that articulation of community relations. So I just want to sort of bring us, I don't want to take too much of the time, but that's here. But I just want to sort of say what the emergent findings from this sort of mapping of the global energy assistance landscape are, particularly for the global north, and trying to understand this labor and trying to understand what it does and how we need to foreground it more. Um, this we found also in more systematic studies in the UK, but it's also globally the case that there's actually lots happening, but it's uncoordinated, it's unsupported. Even like if I look at the latest UN report on just transition and care, even there it's not recognized as something that needs to be lended any kind of assistance itself for recognition, and it's not really well studied either. It's also very diverse. So obviously it's a very third sector activity led, but there's lots of partnerships involved. Many of you will be involved, for example, in European projects that involve frontline work, and those are classic examples of partnerships. But here in the UK, for instance, there's lots of really interesting cases where there's partnerships with the private sector. And then we get the challenges of when it becomes extractive, not just in terms of benefiting the households, extracting a resource from somewhere else, but the household becoming a site of extraction. So there's lots of tension in this process. It's not neutral, um, but in itself, it's a kind of a social infrastructure that and again, colleagues have commented around this a lot, that particularly when we come to the local domain, it is about declining municipal, local capacities to support these activities, because they are something that is, through the principle of subsidiarity, needs something that needs to be happening on the ground with people engaging in their communities. But with obviously austerity happening almost everywhere, with cuts to public services, and also with the growing complexity of these tasks, that's not necessarily happening. And the one thing, and we've commented on this within the EDRC center, it does sort of highlight then when you are providing that support, when in cases when there is such assistance at the local scale, the places where it's provided are not just physical sites where the help is provided. They are not just location. The place-based support is actually usually part of a much wider network. There's wider forms of solidarity, socially reproductive labor, and mutual aid that extend beyond the boundaries of those narrow spots. So That's why we published a paper recently led by Greg Marsden within the Energy Demand Center talking about places being more than just location when we talk about energy demand. Finally, I just want to highlight work by my colleague Hannah Charles and others on retrofit justice. So I think ultimately this is a question of retrofit justice when you bring in this kind of huge element of infrastructural labor in terms of who gets it and where it's present, but also the injustices of the workers themselves, so what they are facing. Lots of precarity. I talked about the very project-based nature of the funding, which I'm sure all of us in the room are very well familiar with. And that in itself creates a kind of injustice in terms of the lack of stability of employment for people in the sector, despite I think, a very socially important, politically important, but also environmentally important role that they perform. Right, so that's all from me. I'm very grateful. I just want to say, if you go to my LinkedIn, sorry to advertise this, I feel very bad, but if you go to my LinkedIn, on the top of my LinkedIn page, there is this survey. So there's a link to the survey there underneath the thank you. So not that's my LinkedIn page, obviously, and then that's the survey. And if you go to that, that's like a survey for global energy assistance professionals that I'm running right now. So if you are working within this sector and if you want to help us, me and others in this space, lend more visibility to this work, we would be grateful if you could complete it because that will feed into the sort of findings of this broader inquiry. So thank you. Thanks to everyone who's been involved in this and thank you, Marine and Lynn, for hosting us today. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Stefan. It's indeed such an important topic. And over the past 2 weeks, actually, I was thinking exactly about that because I was in France meeting with the energy poverty experts, like really the people who are visiting the homes, who are trying day by day to make a difference. And really it's quite incredible how much work they manage to accomplish with so little recognition, so little mean. But what they do is that, yeah, drop by drop and line by line, they manage to really sue something that ends up like restoring faith in humanity and a lot of trust in the system. So yeah, they deserve, I think, our support and our applause. So we'll definitely flag this survey. Is it only in English, Stefan?
Yeah, sorry, it's only in English. I couldn't get ethics for anything other than English. I do apologize. They're
Yeah.
very simple. You can answer in any language that you like.
Okay.
It's the questions are in English. It's a very simple narrative survey with a few questions.
Okay, that's very important to know because a lot of people don't speak English and don't
Yeah,
like
I'm very happy
the
for them to
yeah.
answer in any language that they no
Okay,
problem
great.
at all. Just tell me which language it is, so I
Okay.
figure it out afterwards. But thank you.
Now it's time for Neil Simcock to tell us about his perspective. So Neil is from the Liverpool John Moores University. The floor is yours. You have 20 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to Lynn and Sashka for the invitation as well. I saw the slide you shared before, Lynn, and I feel like I'm in very esteemed company. So it's really nice to have been invited. I'll just share my screen. I'm working over two monitors, which is why I'm currently looking away from the camera, but you should now be able to see the PowerPoint slide. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Yeah, so just to say, this is kind of a work in progress. It's some ideas that I suppose have been sort of developing the last few years. So I'm interested in after the presentation, if anyone has any comments or questions or feedback, that would be really welcome. Just to say as well, like Stefan mentioned earlier, I think all work we do in academia, it's almost always a collaborative effort, right? Because even though I'm presenting this, I've been lucky sort of the last 10, 15 years I've worked with in some kind of very intellectually stimulating environments. And I think all of those collaborations that you have and people that you work with at different points, all of that always informs kind of your ideas and the work that you do. So yeah, this is me, but this is absolutely based on all those collaborations as well, or built from it. So what I'm aiming to do in this presentation is to develop a kind of new theorization of the causes of energy insecurity and inequality by working with the concepts of the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. So this is kind of taking forward the notion that Sashka talked about yesterday, that this inability to attain adequate energy services in the home, we should see this as a socially, politically induced form of injustice. So when we talk about vulnerable people, we should never take that kind of vulnerability as a given or kind of an inherent sort of phenomenon of those individuals. And we should always be asking, okay, how is it that people come to be made vulnerable? Vulnerability is always a situation that people are placed within, right? They're rendered vulnerable. So what I'm basically arguing is that Bourdieu can provide a very interesting, comprehensive, nuanced understanding of the causes of energy insecurity and inequality, thinking beyond only the individual and the household scale to actually consider those kinds of institutional routes through which people are rendered vulnerable. Just a quick note on language as well, because I noticed this was an important topic yesterday. So I'm using the terminology energy insecurity just as a kind of a preference to energy poverty. I guess my feeling is that energy insecurity maybe kind of better invokes a situation and a circumstance that people are faced with rather than a kind of individual characteristic, which has been some of the recent criticism of energy poverty. Anyway, so just a little bit of background on Bourdieu. Many people might be familiar with him and his work. So he's arguably the most influential European sociologist of the 20th century. And he wrote a huge amount, particularly focusing on everyday practice, but also social reproduction and trying to understand how social hierarchies and inequalities are maintained in society and maintained across generations. So looking at things like class division in society, etc. He put this work, these ideas to work at a variety of kind of different empirical topics. So he was a really prolific scholar. He probably wrote as many academic books as I have articles, and the originator of a number of kind of original kind of conceptual ideas. But even though he was incredibly influential and his work is used a lot in particularly in sociology, but also in parts of human geography, it hasn't really been used to a great extent to try and understand energy poverty, energy insecurity. There's a few kind of notable exceptions, but to the large part, his work hasn't really been used in this way. So hopefully, I'll sort of show today how it can be useful. Just to say as well, as I said, Bourdieu was a very prolific scholar. He developed a wide range of different concepts. So we can talk about symbolic power. That came up actually yesterday. Someone briefly mentioned that. Symbolic violence, this idea of doxa and habitus. But today, I'm going to be focusing particularly on two of his most influential concepts. So these ideas of field on the one hand and capital on the other, and really the kind of interplay between those two and how that can lead to situations of energy insecurity. So just to explain briefly those two concepts in turn then. So first of all, this idea of field then. So Bourdieu kind of conceptualized society as comprising a multitude of these kind of semi-autonomous, what he termed fields, right? So a field is a structured kind of social arena, a domain of activity. It's kind of the context within which human action takes place. And every field that we act within, it comprises a range of different positions that individuals are able to occupy. And some of those positions are dominant, they're advantageous, they're the positions that the desirable positions in the field, right? And some of them are dominated and disadvantaged. And individuals acting within the field are kind of occupying, but they're also struggling over the ability to occupy those different positions, right? And what they're trying to do is they're seeking to access those dominant positions, get to the rewards of the field. So you acquire the rewards increasingly as you acquire those more dominant, advantageous positions. And fields as well are also governed by a set of explicit, but also often implicit, a set of rules, a set of logic, a set of norms that kind of govern the behavior and bound the behavior of the actors within them. Now, really important to remember that Bourdieu saw fields as kind of dynamic social constructions, right? So they're not natural phenomenon, they're human creations. So they always have a history, and they can and they do change over time, right? In terms of the positions that are available, in terms of the rules of the field, in terms of the structure. So we can also have a kind of historical analysis if you're analyzing a field and kind of ask, how does it come to be as it is? What's the history behind it and how's it changed? And also to say as well that people aren't in fixed positions within a field, right? It's a dynamic process. People are constantly moving within and between fields. So just to kind of give you a very quick example, academia is actually something that some people have conceptualized as a field, right? Because we can think of academia almost in a kind of competitive space in some ways, and different academics are kind of jockeying for, you know, their ideas to have influence, to attain kind of prestige and rewards within the field, promotions, etc. And then alongside field, the second idea to look at is this idea of capital, right? So Bourdieu saw capital as a type of power resource, so it can be deployed to appropriate advantages within a given field. So those people who have relatively greater stocks of capital can use that capital to dominate others, to attain advantageous positions and obtain a specific rewards off the field, while those who have relatively less capital occupy the least desirable field positions. Now, really importantly, a central feature of Bourdieu's work, when we think about capital, often we think about money, right, and financial resources. But he was really strong in arguing that power and dominance arise not only from access to material resources, so economic capital, although that's important, but also from a wider range of resources as well. So he talked as well about social capital. So this is about having sort of influential social connections through which you're able to acquire information or advantages in some way. Then cultural capital, which was maybe his most famous influential concept, which is about knowledges and skills, but those that are deemed legitimate within dominant value systems, right? So this isn't really a deficit approach. It's not saying that people who lack cultural capital necessarily lack knowledge and skills, right? It's saying that everyone has some knowledge and skills, but it's just that some people's are recognized or valued or seen as legitimate within dominant institutions. And it's also about kind of more subtle forms of situational, embodied forms of know-how, right? So it's about kind of knowing the correct and often subtle behavioral norms that you would use in a given situation, the right kind of phrases and terminology, speaking with the right kind of accent, as well as like kind of those more kind of obvious forms of knowledge, I guess. And then finally, he also talked about symbolic capital as well, which is about status and recognition. And in his later work, he talked about negative symbolic capital. So situations where people not only lack symbolic capital, but they're actually actively stigmatized. They're actively ascribed a negative reputation. Now, Bourdieu also took the distribution of these capitals across society, not as kind of a given, a fixed given, but again, something that has roots and something that is produced through institutions. And one of the ways he tried to understand this through this idea of capital conversion, the idea that each of these forms of capital can be potentially converted into another, right? So just to give you a couple of quick examples to show how that would work, this is the idea that if you have social capital, if you have powerful social connections, that can ease you in getting access to high paid jobs. So the old kind of adage of it's not what you know, it's who you know. And then also economic capital providing cultural capital, being converted to cultural capital, because money can buy you access to elite forms of education, travel, various kinds of cultural experiences through which the kind of upper classes are able to acquire cultural capital. So those are the concepts. And now I'm hopefully going to show how they can be put to use to try and understand energy insecurity. So the kind of starting point here then, if we're trying to theorize energy insecurity using Bourdieu, the starting point is that different positions in social fields, as I said, offer varying rewards, opportunities, and constraints. And actually, some people have more recently argued that some positions within certain fields may actually expose people to conditions that are actively hazardous or harmful. Following from that, there are certain social fields that we can see as being of relevance to energy insecurity, because a person's position within those fields and the conditions, the opportunities, constraints that they experience in those positions, they can influence their ability to attain energy services. So those who adopt more dominant positions in these relevant fields are relatively privileged in terms of their ability to attain energy services in the home, while those people who are relegated to the lowest positions in relevant social fields are exposed to conditions that hinder their attainment of essential domestic energy services, therefore increasing their risk of experiencing energy insecurity. So by this understanding, vulnerability to energy insecurity is an outcome of a person's field position, which is itself determined by their access to various forms of capital. So these kind of conceptual diagrams, that's kind of an abstract idea. So these are a way to try and illustrate it. So that they're supposed to be conceptual, not, empirically accurate per se. But I've got these conceptual diagrams of 3 relevant fields to help illustrate the arguments. So in each of these cases, a person's position within the field has implications for their ability to attain energy services. So on these diagrams here, the kind of large circles, these are just there to kind of illustrate the boundary of the field, right? And then the small circles within them, these illustrate the individual field positions. And the positions at the top here, these are the kind of more powerful, advantageous, the dominant positions, and the lower ones are the kind of disadvantaged, marginalized positions at the bottom of the field. So if we take the example of the housing field, this connects to energy efficiency, and I'll talk about this more later, but the idea is that your position in the field of housing, the home that you occupy, influences the type of home you occupy, and the energy efficiency and the quality of the home, which of course has implications for your ability to keep your home warm and attain energy services. Then if we take the example of the labor market, another kind of field, this clearly influences the income that you get and your ability to then afford your energy costs. So the top positions would correspond with kind of the elite occupations, so the owners of capital or executive positions like CEOs. And then at the bottom, these would be characterized by the kind of more precarious forms of labor that Stefan briefly noted. And then we'd have the domestic energy market, where in this case, many countries operate domestic energy markets. So we have a range of different tariffs available, which kind of represent the positions of the field. And these, of course, influence the price you pay for energy. So the advantageous positions, these are the best tariffs in which people pay the least per unit. So in order to navigate through these different fields and to get to the advantageous positions, people can draw on various kinds of capitals that I mentioned, right? So this is kind of illustrated here by this, which represents the volume of capital. So bring that to life a bit more, I'll just talk you through one example of the energy market, right? So as I mentioned, there's different kinds of tariffs within the domestic energy market. And depending on what tariff you're on, you'll pay a different amount for the energy and the electricity that you receive in your home. So some of the most desirable tariffs actually in the UK at the current moment are flexible, or what we call time of use tariffs, where if you shift your energy consumption in response to market signals, you can receive a big discount on the amount you pay for your energy. Now, in this kind of system, the most privileged people who have access to the most economic capital are able to invest in technologies that allow them to take advantage of the system, right? So they can get solar PV on their home, they can invest in energy storage, they can install smart thermostats and smart appliances, right? Whereas people who have the least economic capital and other forms of capital as well, they're least able to engage. So we end up with a situation where very often the people who are the most advantaged in terms of their access to capital end up on the most privileged tariffs as well. And the people who are least able to engage are relegated to the worst tariffs, and they pay the most for their energy. Now, under this kind of conceptualization, you can potentially, in theory, have an advantageous position in one field and be dominated in another one, right? So you could, in theory, be on a good energy tariff, but also be in very energy inefficient housing or have a very limited income, right? So to some extent, your position in these different fields would can potentially offset one another or counteract one another. So the most marginalized, the most disadvantaged, the people with the greatest risk of energy insecurity would be people that are persistently disadvantaged in multiple different fields, right? So that's the theoretical idea. It also leads to kind of a set of empirical questions. So if we were using this idea and we wanted to put it to work, we could ask questions, first of all, about the structure of a given field. What are the rules and logic that govern it? How has it come to be structured in that way? What are the different field positions and what are the implications for energy insecurity? We could also ask questions about which capitals are most important for navigating a given field. So it may not always be about economic capital. In some cases, it might be others. And how does access to that capital influence the person's field position? And we can take those two questions in turn. And in doing that analysis, that can help us understand both who's most at risk of energy insecurity, but also why. What are the mechanisms through which their vulnerability is produced? So a very quick case study then, just to demonstrate how this idea can be put to work in a bit more empirical detail. So I'm going to look at energy insecurity in the private rented sector in England. So in England, the PRS is known to have the highest prevalence of non-decent, energy inefficient homes. It has the highest rates of fuel poverty, but also we know that there's deep inequalities in who's most exposed to that. So it tends to be low-income people, racialized minorities, people living in multiple occupancy housing, and so on. So how can we use Bourdieu to help us understand this situation? So this is a case study just based on some interviews that I did a few years ago with tenants and policy experts and frontline support workers. So the first thing we do in undertaking this analysis is we'd look at the structure of the field itself, right? And we can see the private rented sector as kind of a subfield of the wider housing field, which would also include owner occupation and social housing, other forms of tenure. But the private rented sector is connected to those, but it has its own structure, its own kind of governing logic. So in a housing market, your position in that field has a kind of specific materiality, right? So a physical dwelling with specific material arrangements, and you're occupying a position within that, which is a particular home or a living situation. So we know in the private rented sector in England, 20% of homes at the bottom of the field are classified as non-decent, energy inefficient, right? And really important as well is the fact that the private rented sector is what we could call a saturated field, right? In the sense that there are more prospective tenants than there are material dwellings in the sector, right? So more people want a home, demand is greater than supply effectively. And what this basically means is that someone is always going to occupy these non-decent, energy inefficient homes. They're never going to be empty. So the market incentive for the landlord to improve conditions is minimal. Also importantly, access to housing in this field is based on purchasing power, effectively how much money you have, how much economic capital, and the rules of the field in terms of the regulation of housing standards, etc., has kind of been weakened over the last decade or so as a result of economic austerity and so on. So within this structure, who then is most vulnerable? And this is where we bring in the concept of capital, right? So the risk of living in an energy inefficient home in the bottom of the PRS field is the outcome of two processes. First of all, your capacity to access energy efficient housing when you're trying to find a home in the first place. And the most important capital here is economic capital, right? So as I said, access to housing in the PRS is based on purchasing power. Those who have the fewest financial resources have the least choice, and often the only choice they have is to live in a non-decent, energy inefficient home because it's all that's affordable in their budget. It's all that's available to them. We can also think potentially about social capital as well, because if you have family connections or other kinds of social connections, potentially that can be converted into economic capital that can help you. People can lend you money essentially to help you pay for deposits or for rent. So that can widen your housing options. And also symbolic capital as well. So one of the things I discovered in my research was kind of stigmatization and prejudice towards certain social groups means that some landlords actually don't want to take people on because of kind of a stigmatized belief about those people, right? So I don't want people who are reliant on welfare, stigma towards racialized minorities or homeless people that can kind of further compound and restrict their housing options and leave them, as I said, with very little choice over where they live. Then alongside that, we can also think about the capacity to maintain and improve the energy efficiency of your home when you're actually living in it. And really important here is actually, it's not so much economic capital, it's about cultural capital. So I mentioned previously how the regulation in the private rented sector is often weak, it's often reactive, right? So action is typically only taken when it's initiated by the tenants themselves. It's not a proactive system. It relies on tenants complaining essentially about their housing standards. And of course, that requires to take that action requires various forms of cultural capital. It requires an understanding of your rights, an understanding of the support systems that are available to you, and also kind of these more subtle forms of symbolic mastery, right? So having an ease, a sense of confidence, a sense of assertiveness when you're dealing with authorities, right? Knowing the kind of correct language that you need to use and the right forms of communication. And this is exemplified here by this quote. This was with an energy advisor. And she said to me that if somebody's sitting quietly there waiting and has phoned you once, and actually you've not had time to respond to them with the best will in the world, do they get as much attention? Because some people, those with more cultural capital of some form, are more able to articulate themselves and be a right pain for you. It's a very assertive, repeated calling, and actually sometimes that works. So I'm aware of time, so I'm not going to go too much into those final points, but I just want to kind of finish up with a concluding slide and some final thoughts. So first of all, how this framework that I presented, how can budget actually help us understand energy insecurity? And I haven't had much time. I've kind of had to rush through slightly, but I feel that it can help give us a kind of very multifaceted, very nuanced analysis. And the useful thing about Bourdieu is he can combine both structure, in terms of you look at the structure of the field and the context that people are acting within, and the relative agency of different individuals, which is determined by their access to different kinds of capitals. And this concept of capital actually is really useful and important, particularly these ideas of cultural and symbolic capital, because I feel like they can offer new kinds of insights into how energy insecurity is being reproduced. In terms of future research avenues, obviously the case study I presented, it's an empirical case of England. If we did a similar analysis using that conceptual framework in different places, in different contexts, we would have different kinds of answers. We could also look potentially at bringing a wider range of Bourdieu's concepts into the framework. So ideas like habitus, for example, that could eventually be incorporated. And I'd really be interested to see how Bourdieu could be combined with other kinds of theoretical approaches. So the capabilities approach would be one, but also kind of more political economy type approaches, right? So trying to understand the history of a given field or how certain capitals come to be distributed as they are. Anyway, so I'll leave it there. Apologies, I think I went a couple of minutes over, so sorry about that. But thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Hopefully that all made sense. And yeah, I'm very, very happy to take any questions, or please do contact me by email. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. I wasn't expecting to hear a presentation about Bourdieu, so that's very, very refreshing for me. Yes, I'm French, and we studied Bourdieu already in high school, so it's something that is quite, let's say, mindset that we kind of never forget once we have learned about it. So
that means you'll be able to notice all the mistakes that I made, though.
In the pronunciation, maybe we need to work on that, but that's okay. No, that's really, really interesting to have this perspective about really understanding the kind of social capital, how we can unlock, and what you just said about people not daring to ask. It's typically something that some kind of experience that also comes out from the conversation I had with frontline workers. Typically, what they will say is that many people don't believe in Santa, and they it's their way to really let's say, frame that they don't have the social capital to ask for a broader support system. So now we will move to Paula Damaszka from the Zielona Energetyka z Radugara. Paula, this is, you have 20 minutes. I'm also really excited by your presentation. So then we will have Catherine Sugar. And then we will, if we manage to do it well, we will still have 20 minutes for a conversation. So Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Okay, I will now first share my screen. Hopefully, I'm doing it. Am I?
Yes, we can see that.
Perfect. Perfect. It was also great for me to hear the Neil's presentation. So my background is in sociology, so it was great to connect these dots that I'm trying to also portray to my colleagues, which are mostly engineers working in renewable energy and solar specifically. So let me dive in to this presentation by firstly introducing who we are, then our experience in energy poverty sector and the projects that we have done so far, and then I will dive into the WISE project, which is currently happening, and explain a bit what we are trying to do on the ground. So now we're moving a bit from theory to practice, and how do these everyday struggles really look like in the homes of the energy vulnerable people. If I get very close to the end of my time frame, please do let me know so that I can speed up and say.
Will do, no worries.
Thank you so much. Okay. So yes, I come from Green Energy Cooperative. To say it in English, it's a bit it's a bit more easy to understand. So we are a social enterprise, a cooperative. We have about 20 members, and as I said, most of them come from the fields of energy, economy, and environmental protection. Besides doing projects which are mainly focused on energy communities, how we can reach them, the legislative barriers, financial barriers, and stuff like that, and obviously, how we can incorporate energy vulnerable households into the scheme of energy sharing, which is the main idea of energy communities. We are also doing a separate activities, which is basically gathering people to have group purchases of solar panels, and we have our own network of solar installers and in-house engineers who are doing the projects for those said solars. So this is basically us. To start from the beginning, our first project dealing with energy vulnerable households was the electrification of rural areas of Croatia using renewable energy sources. So here we use the grant money from a project that we applied to, and we use that money as seed money, and then we went to municipalities to gather more funding and to provide to the rural parts of Croatia where there isn't any network, where there isn't any infrastructure for electricity. So we provided them electricity for the first time by using renewable energy, so solar panels, and combining them with batteries so that they could be energy more resilient and to have better living standards, basically. After that, we dove into another project, which is called Community Energy for Energy Solidarity. Here, we tried another approach to dealing and addressing energy vulnerability in Croatia by another mechanism. So we were collecting donations from the one side from organizations and bigger players, so to say, on the market, and from the other side from individuals who are interested in alleviating energy vulnerability in Croatia. So with those combined donors, we managed to raise about 17,000 euros, and with that we provided 200 sorry, 250 households with energy care packages. Here we learned a lot in this process. On one hand, we realized just how important trust is between energy vulnerable people and institutions trying to help them. They weren't very keen on applying themselves to receiving this free help. And yeah, so to say this free help, you can see here. So those were extension cords with a switch. Those were LED bulbs. Those were brushes for the doors to keep the draft away. Also, reflective foil that goes behind the radiators, and the window and door seals. And also, we had an aerator for water. Can anyone maybe help me? So aerators for the pipe where the water goes. So you use less water when you install this. Basically, what we found is that it's quite hard to get to our target audience here, mostly because they're also digitally they aren't on socials. You cannot just share and expect some kind of response. But we had to print out the materials, go to the places that they gather naturally. So those were mostly public spaces like public libraries. Also, I went to the pharmacies, um, social institutions where they go to get some kind of social aid, financial aid, and we distributed these and hope that they would call us on our phone and apply for this help. And after that, we also had a network of volunteers that we educated on how to apply these measures into their homes. Also, we gave advice on behavioral changes they can do to make themselves more energy efficient. And what is very important too is that we provided them with information on who they can contact to get more help, to get financial help, or to, make some sort of network between themselves, apply for stuff, or just advocate for themselves in the institutions that are here for that, basically. Um, I personally went to 70 of those homes and really saw what it's like in what does energy vulnerability looks like when you get to those homes. What surprised me is that they really, really know how to be energy efficient. They have a skill set of that I could then learn to my volunteers on how they can educate others on. So each household had a separate way of doing things. What is quite typical for Croatia. So in Community Energy for Energy Solidarity, we were focused on seniors because statistics in Croatia show that seniors, especially senior women, are the most vulnerable to energy vulnerability slash poverty, however we want to name it today. But yes, since they have more tendencies to have chronic illnesses, they have smaller pensions than male seniors because they were paid less during their um, working years. And yes, where was I going with this? So yes, we were concentrated mostly on senior women here. And yes, so this was my train of thought. What is typical for Croatia is that back in the day, people used to invest in big apartments. And now, years and years later, those people are seniors and living in over-dimensioned households, which they cannot afford to heat or to cool during summer. And we come to a situation where they are living in one small room, which they try to hermetically, divide from the rest of the huge apartment that they are in. And basically, as they're living in debt capital, they're too old, they don't have the social structures behind them to help them move, to help them through this transition into a smaller apartment or something like that. And basically, they're there and willingly decided to be there until it's their end, and this is the end of the story. So yes, this project was very a big learning curve. We really learned a lot from this, and now we came to the relevant project for which is currently going on, and this is Women in Solidarity for Energy. In WISE project, we are targeting unmarried women, single mothers, elderly women, and immigrants. So we are a bit broadening the scope because these are also all categories that are specifically vulnerable to energy poverty. Um, so in Croatia, you can see I drop one of the statistics just to point out the relevance. But yes, in 2023, 31.2% of people living at risk of poverty or social exclusion in the EU reported living in dwelling that was not comfortably warm during winter compared to 14.4 of those not at risk. So this is why we went for people, women living alone, and women immigrants in Zagreb and in Croatia. Immigrants are not, we don't have that big percentage of immigrants, but it is in the rise. So we think that it's a great time to start also looking at their problems, their main pain points in getting to the help they need and in getting to the households that are appropriate for living and all those things. So yes, a few more statistics and why this is relevant is that 83% of single parent households are headed by women. They have lower incomes due to their part-time or precarious jobs and unpaid care responsibilities. And in Croatia specifically, 32.5% of women were identified as energy poor in 2022 compared to 21.2% of men. So there is a significant difference. Senior women have lower pensions, as I said, longer life expectations, and age-related health vulnerabilities. They are more vulnerable to low temperatures, to mold, and to stuff like that than men. So they need a bit two Celsius degrees warmer dwellings than men in general. And also immigrant women who often live in poorly insulated housing, they have much bigger barriers to accessing affordable energy services. They have language barriers, they don't have the social capital, they don't have the symbolic capital, they often don't have also the economic capital. They do have rich cultural capital, but which goes unrecognized, I would say, for now, in Croatia specifically. Mm. And yes, they have more difficulties in entering the labor market. And here we have also the category of women without a partner, so single women in the EU, which also are at higher risk of energy poverty because they have lower average incomes, which and all their expenses they go to by themselves. They have lower employment. They are often less paid, doing part-time, lower levels of literacy in terms of energy and fundamental rights. This is something that was very concerning in the previous projects, concretely CEASE project. When we went to the households, we asked. We also had a partner, which was University of Birmingham. They were doing surveys, so we were handed out surveys, which we then went through with the householders. And yeah, it was quite amazing in how much they don't realize their own energy bills, they don't know their rights, and they don't know who to turn to if they come across a problem or if they experience uncomfortableness in their own homes. Um, Yes, and obviously they have little to no chance of participating in energy or social policies to improve their situation. So this is why one of the first activities of WISE project, sorry, was to assemble national collectives of experts, because we also noticed that this is a multi-sectoral problem. So we have energy, we have social sector, we have housing, we have health, and each of those sectors acknowledges few of the problems or few of the consequences of energy vulnerability and these problems, but they don't communicate on trying to resolve them. So the programs and the policies that are made um, are often not connected, or they do not take the whole picture into account when providing some sort of solutions to the problems. Uh, this is just an overview, a graph of the difference between men and women at risk of poverty rate by sex from 2010 and 2022. Um, and yes, the key challenges that I would say here are the lack of centralized data on vulnerable groups. So we do not have data which is the same data over the bigger part of the population that experiences these problems. We do have some dotted efforts, but they are not uniform and they do not provide a big set of data on a bigger number of people. We have weak coordination between the sectors, which I explained already, and we have limited financial instruments for targeted support and subsidies. This is also a big issue because, yes, financial instruments are depending on factors that are not related to energy poverty. So they take into account material poverty, but they do not take account the energy aspect. So the for example, the energy certificate of the household or something like so. What WISE aims to do is to raise awareness generally, to get involved and empower and show solidarity towards those group of women who are not usually active in civic participation. So to give them a voice through us if they do not feel comfortable, they do not know how to communicate this, and bring those stories on a national and then EU level. Empower and support those vulnerable women to get directly involved in strategies and to create social, cross-generational and cross-cultural cohesion among women without partners. Uh, Specific activities through which we are doing this was, at first we had this, like I said, national collective assembly of experts. Then we had a translate-a-thon, so an event where we translated relevant materials, for example, educational materials, tips for using energy effectively, and recommendations for policies and measures. We also had a toolkit called Right to Energy, where we specifically listed all the rights that all EU citizens have in relation to energy. Then we had a series of documentaries who were portraying energy poverty, energy vulnerability in various worldwide situations. So we had from Africa to Great Britain to Ukraine, and people shared stories through these documentaries about what does energy poverty look like in their case and in their context, national context, which then we brought to various places. For example, I went to my old faculty and showed these documentaries to sociology students, which had great ideas, and this sparked a lot of conversation and rose awareness. And we're having workshops. So workshops in more senses than one. First, we will hold workshops with volunteers who will then offer help to energy vulnerable households. But we will also have workshops for our targeted groups of vulnerable women, um, which will improve their energy knowledge, understand their rights, create opportunities to participate in co-design of policy and communication. So right now in Croatia, we are in the process of public consultations on a social climate plan. And yes, this is a great way of gathering those who are in need, presenting them with the current plan and asking them for feedback, and then incorporating this in this public commentary way. And we will also have Energy Solidarity Days, which we will, again, similar in the CEASE project, we will help with small interventions in their homes, or we will learn them how to use those interventions in their homes. Yes, hopefully I didn't take too much time with this. And yes, here I put some questions for discussion. Maybe since I'm not the last one, maybe I could read this in the end when all the speakers are done. But yes, this is it basically. So thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Paula. And I can see already some questions for you. I think what you shared was extremely enlightening and a very good illustration of, let's say, the theory that was expressed before by Stefan and Neil. So that was absolutely excellent. Thank you so much for all of this. Paula, I see that there might be something you want to comment on, like by bringing in some links in the chat. So maybe that's something you can do while Catherine is speaking. Catherine, I think it's your name's day as well. So happy name's day. Today is also the day against violence against women. So I think it's really important that we had this conversation, Paula, about energy poverty among women really today. Really appreciate it. So Catherine, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes and then it will be time for a nice chat with our four speakers.
Great, thank you so much. So, hi everyone. I've really enjoyed the presentation so far. So I appreciate I'm the last one, but hopefully it will add to the discussion. So my name's Catherine Sugar. I'm a research fellow in the School of Environment, Education and Development at the University of Manchester. First and foremost, thank you to the organisers, especially Lynn, for inviting me to contribute today. I'm really excited to share some insights from my work that I've been conducting over recent years. And I hope that this will contribute to today's discussion on how structural inequalities shape everyday energy struggles, and why this really matters for fair energy transitions. So when we talk about energy justice, we often picture households struggling with bills and living with home energy injustices. And it's really vital that we continue to look at the domestic households. But I actually feel it's not the whole story. Even though energy justice is incredibly important when we talk about domestic households, we actually need to look beyond the immediate home. And by this, I mean the non-domestic sector. So the non-domestic sector is a really important but often neglected dimension when we talk about energy justice. And this is because structural inequalities, they don't just affect households. They also shape energy struggles for businesses, public institutions, and community spaces, which in turn have a profound impact on households. For example, where they can access support, what support is provided, and who falls behind. So we can take, for example, excuse me, a community hub that can't afford heating. What happens to the social groups that rely on that space? Where do they go? Or we can imagine a charity providing home energy advice in a public library. What happens when that library has to close or limits its opening hours? How does that affect people and households? So my research looks at both domestic and non-domestic sectors. And within this non-domestic sector, I'm going to talk about SMEs, small to medium enterprises, and VCSEs, which stand for voluntary, community, and social enterprises. And just to kind of confirm, I recognize that not everyone here might have the same understanding of what an SME is, but in the UK and within the wider EU, SMEs are businesses with less than 250 employees. So I'm really interested in how these spaces and these different sectors, so the domestic and non-domestic sector, connect with relation to energy justice. And I'm going to argue that they are in fact deeply connected. So I just wanted to give a very quick overview of how my research experience kind of feeds into what I'm going to talk about today. My research experience is based broadly around place-based, low carbon and just transitions. And this basically means understanding how cities and communities can move towards sustainable energy systems whilst also ensuring fairness and equity. I've worked across a number of projects which have explored three main themes, and you can see these on the screen. So the first one that I'm interested in is the different governing actors and how they interact across scales to implement low carbon and inclusive transitions. The second one that I'm also interested in is the various transition pathways. So thinking, for example, how innovative schemes and delivery models can shape place-based carbon, low carbon and just transitions. And finally, the third is about how this is implemented in practice and what sort of opportunities, challenges, and tensions can arise during these schemes that are happening across these different actors and across these different scales. So I'm going to draw on these sort of themes and experiences to speak more about this topic today. And Stefan's briefly introduced our work at the Energy Demand Research Centre, and we've been investigating the energy advice landscape for both domestic and non-domestic sectors. And our research has shown that energy advice is absolutely crucial to decarbonisation and also to equity and justice dimensions. Without energy advice, people and businesses, they often don't know what to do or where to go to for advice. And this is the first point that I'd like to make, and Stefan's already alluded to this, that the UK's energy advice landscape is very messy and it's very, very fragmented. So we've been looking to learn more about this messy and fragmented system. And what we found is that the organisations that provide home energy advice are mostly made up of VCSEs, voluntary, community and social enterprises. They often focus on fuel poverty, so they provide short-term help like winter fuel vouchers or materials like LED light bulbs, radiator foils or air fryers to immediately support households. And I can see that Paula in her work has actually been doing this as well, as she's just spoken about. There are also VCSEs and some SMEs that provide households with retrofit advice. They provide advice on the more sort of big ticket items, such as insulation, heat pumps, solar panels, and ventilation systems. And these organizations play a really crucial role in guiding people through what is an often overwhelming, risky, and uncertain process of making significant home changes and upgrades. They can help demystify information for households. They can help them understand what improvements are possible, what steps are needed, and what benefits will result. However, organizationally, there is really limited coordination between these two worlds. So the fuel poverty advice on the one world, and the retrofit advice on the other world. And this lack of crossover between the two is really problematic. Advice needs to support immediate energy needs, as well as short and longer term home energy improvements. For instance, those planning for long-term home energy improvements, like installing a heat pump, might still need advice on how to stay warm and keep bills manageable in the shorter term. And equally as important, people looking for the sort of immediate help with energy costs, they also need lasting fixes through home energy improvements. And there is a real lack of a clear process to support people through the journey of retrofitting their homes. So the current provision that we've got is not really addressing these two very important parts of energy advice. And this is leaving households behind, and it's ineffective for addressing home energy inequities. And an example of this is that people often describe winter fuel vouchers as providing a bit of a sticking plaster over issues, and that they're not really helping to address the root causes of the problem and help alleviate these issues in the longer term. There are also stark geographic disparities across the UK on where energy advice is provided, as well as what kinds of advice is provided. So in other words, where people live or where businesses are based determines what help they can access. And this is often described as a postcode lottery. We found that urban areas generally have a higher provision of energy advice support, and rural areas have almost none, and this can leave them more vulnerable. And this does, of course, differ across the UK due to the devolution of responsibilities. For those not quite so familiar, we have a devolved governments across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and each nation has its own sort of setup of government, which can make this energy advice landscape even more convoluted when we're looking at the UK as a whole. And I don't really have time today to go down this sort of rabbit hole of talking about the devolution of responsibilities in the UK, but generally speaking, Scotland has a more nationally supported service, which is called Home Energy Scotland, in comparison to England and Wales, which is devolved to more regional and local levels. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the non-domestic energy advice also mirrors this. So Scotland has a more nationally supported system through Business Energy Scotland compared to the rest of the UK. So my main point that I'd like to make here is that geography and the structure of the governance within that really matters when it comes to domestic and non-domestic energy advice. The next structural inequality I'd like to talk about is the funding landscape of energy advice and energy improvements and the effect that this has on households and businesses alike. As I mentioned, the governing landscape of both domestic and non-domestic energy advice and improvements is complex and uneven across the UK. The funding for energy advice completely mirrors this complexity. Funding for most energy advice provision is competitive. It's in small amounts. It's provided on a short-term basis, so about 2 to 3 years maximum. And this makes it really hard for energy advice organizations, which, as I mentioned, are the sort of voluntary community and social enterprises, to actually plan their work, to retain their staff, and to run stable programs in the longer term. And this, of course, has a negative effect on households and organizations, because when advice providers lose out on funding, they stop helping the communities that they serve. And it has a knock-on effect on the wider energy landscape as well. So as funding is so competitive for energy advice and improvements, resources become limited, and these service providers often end up working in isolation instead of together. So someone mentioned yesterday that these networks, sort of energy experts, as they called it, becomes really disjointed. It becomes competitive and it becomes incredibly siloed. Funding for the non-domestic energy improvements is equally as fragmented. And for SMEs and VCSEs, the challenge is even greater. There is increasing pressure on businesses to decarbonize. And we can see this pressure is growing, for example, within procurement requirements, which require businesses to have their own carbon reduction plans. And that's something that I'm looking at in a separate project, which I'm taking part in within the Connected Places Catapult. So SMEs and VCSEs, they also fall through the cracks of mainstream schemes. They have fewer resources compared to large commercial actors. They're often dependent on local supply chains as well. And this means that their business suffers if they can't decarbonize themselves, or if they can't prove that they are actively trying to decarbonize. And so this creates a structural disadvantage for SMEs and VCSEs. They can't decarbonize their own stock. And of course, having inefficient buildings for businesses can affect their wider operations. And we've seen this in the UK and continue to see this, that key community spaces often struggle to keep their spaces warm for social activities and services, and they consequently might have to shut down either temporarily or permanently due to these high operation costs, or cut down on staff resources. And this impacts the groups who rely on these spaces to access these community services, or simply to keep warm and socialize, as we've seen in the rise of warm spaces within the UK. And the final structural issue that I want to mention is this overlap of other forms of inequities. And there is evidence that energy services like advice and improvements are not just about energy. And there is a lot of research that's already documenting the other inequalities that occur alongside home energy injustices. And some speakers have already spoken about this, like the sort of health injustices that go along with this. And within academia, scholars have kind of already acknowledged that we need a relational understanding to energy demand, and we need a better understanding of what sort of social relationships and interactions are produced and reproduced within this. But perhaps what we have found that hasn't really been seen before or spoken about before is that in the case of energy advisors, they're also providing holistic support on a wide range of frontline issues that go far beyond the remits of what is kind of considered traditional energy advice. And this can include mental health, first aid, safeguarding, fire safety, and even domestic violence awareness. And this can lead to energy advisors requiring more training, have to work in areas which are not their specialty. And this additional work is putting pressure on their time, and they're not getting formally recognized for this work. And there's a quote here on the left side of the screen from an interview, and I feel that it really shows this. And I quote, "There's a line to be trodden. We get into this line of work because we want to help people, and our advisors are just so compassionate and will do anything to help people. But we do have to put some boundaries in place because we're not social workers, we're not counselors, we're not mental health professionals, we're not handymen, nor mortgage advisors." And this quote from an energy advisor, I think, is a really clear example that shows that when the social safety net is weakened from years of austerity, as an example, structural inequalities in energy really ripple through society. And energy advisors and communities alike face the brunt. And I'm not sure if this is the case in other areas of the world or if the UK is unique in this regard, but I'd be really interested to hear more from our audience and in other country contexts. So I'd like to just conclude with these final points. I think in order to tackle energy justice within the home, we also need to look at structural inequalities beyond the home. And the non-domestic sector, as I've spoken about, the SMEs and VCSEs today, is an example of this. Structural inequalities, like I've shown in the organization of energy advice, the sort of geographical provision of energy advice, the funding and governance of energy advice and improvements, shapes who gets help, how quickly they get help, and how effectively as well. Energy advice and improvements are also more than technical advice. It's social, it's emotional, and it's deeply tied to wider inequities. And we can see this perpetuating through the role of energy advisors themselves having to work beyond their traditional remits. And finally, if we want fair energy transitions, we really must challenge these structural inequities. And this can be through the provision of stable funding, as the other speakers have called for, coordinated governance, and inclusive policies that address these inequalities head on for households and non-domestic spaces alike. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Also, an absolutely fascinating conversation and presentation, and it's really great to see how all of this articulates with the previous presentations. So, thank you so much. There are some questions in the chat. I think we should start by trying to unfold them. First, there is one question from Lynn who asked Neil if why he chose a field and capital, these two components to develop, and not the others included in Bourdieu, such as habitus, etc. So a clarification for you, Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. It was just kind of empirically driven. So when I did the study that I mentioned, I kind of didn't really go in with a theoretical framework per se. So I did the empirical work, and then I was looking, okay, what theory can help me explain what I'm seeing here and help me understand this system and these inequalities. So I came to Bourdieu through that, and yeah, so it was using the concepts that made sense for explaining my questions and what I was trying to answer, I guess. So habitus, I can totally see how it would be relevant, but to energy insecurity, but not in terms of the questions that I wanted to ask, if you see what I mean. So field and capital were the most relevant ones for me.
Okay, so there is so much more to explore, and this is exactly the right platform to make the new connections for the next project. Neil, you also had a question for Stefan. Stefan talked about social infrastructures, and can you say a little bit more about social infrastructure, Stefan? So the term has been used by Eric Klinenberg, who defines social infrastructure as shared space that enable people to connect, such as libraries. Does your conceptualization align with this, or is this slightly different?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. It's something that we've been talking about a lot in the Just Center. So Neil, you should join our conversations. I will send you an email. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the departure point. It's the idea of a shared space outside of the material. Well, it has a material components, but it's not necessarily material in its essence. Um, we've tried to move a little bit beyond that. There is now work on social infrastructure as anything that allows society to function. And in that sense, it goes beyond those formal spaces into actually things like connections that people have in their everyday lives or other forms of sociality that in fact enable shared societal connections and livelihoods. So it's gone a little bit beyond that. So in fact, social infrastructure could be something that happens online, for example, or it also could be conversations among neighbors, or it could be how you connect to uh, political organizations in some way. So the discussions that happen around that. So it's a bit broader. Some people, even a colleague of mine, Sarah Marie Holst, talked about social reproduction. So the sphere of the everyday as social infrastructure. People talk about it, the body as social infrastructure, even nature as social infrastructure. So there's a lot more there that we're trying to unpack. Yeah, and I think when I look at this energy assistance sector, it's involved in all of that. And Catherine's quote there from the advisor of what all of the things that they do actually highlights that they actually do a lot of social infrastructuring. In fact, that's kind of the other discussion we're having. It's more partly also about the process through which infrastructure is built and functions rather than what it actually is in a sort of very fixed sense. I hope there was a bit of a muddled answer. Sorry, I hope that helps clarify where we're coming from. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's like the, let's say, invisible network of people who surround you and who have an influence on your decision making at the end of the day.
Yes, and your
Yeah.
ability to function in society. So, and that could those could be all kinds of. So there's a kind of energy and social relations approach that Lucy Middlemiss and others, and I think Julia, I think she's in the audience also, I know has been involved in that. So that kind of that idea has also permeated a lot in our understanding of social infrastructure.
That's really interesting. I have like some kind of a follow-up question, also given what's going on with the state of the world. At COP, the UN decided to put the fight against disinformation on climate as one of the big, let's say, a big monumentous challenge that we need to address. So is it something like the negative impact of social infrastructure on your decision making or your absence of decision making, something you are considering to address? Like, for
Yeah,
instance, the
definitely.
fact that you
Yeah.
don't take the actions that could help you.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a discussion because we had a workshop last week and we talked about that a lot in the Just Center. So actually, it's things like, well, sorry, I'm going to be a little bit political here, but where does the far right manage to, how does it spread climate skepticism or welfare chauvinism? How does it manage to do that? And it also uses social infrastructure.
Yeah.
So, we use social infrastructure can be used in different ways. It's not per se a kind of a socially progressive thing, but it's there. And in fact, yeah, so what austerity has done, again, the conversation we've been having is austerity has eroded the kind of, in a lot of these contexts, the kind of social infrastructure that allows for inclusion and progressiveness. And it has actually led to a retreat into other domains of social infrastructure that are more conducive to conspiracy theories and the politics of fear and all that kind of stuff. So, I'm my kind of understanding of this is that we're actually in a crisis of infrastructure more than anything else. Not, in a way, it's a kind of capital to resonate to what others, Neil was saying. You could look at it in that sense. And everyone has different capital. I don't want to say who is in like if you're on the right wing of the spectrum or if you're a climate skepticist or something, that you are stripped of social infrastructure. It is just that that those crises are sometimes generated through a particular use because you're still using your social media. But if I'm still on Facebook. Actually, I don't use it, but every time I open it, it's absolutely horrifying what it throws at me. And I'm thinking, well, a lot of people use it as their primary source of information, or even Twitter still. So, and that's a huge infrastructure right there.
Yeah, it becomes an echo chamber, right, of
Yeah.
our viewpoints. I think it ties nicely with something that Paula shared about the difficulty for the organization and the project that you've been working on to reach women. So, in a way, how did you kind of navigate those? Let's say social infrastructure, even if like they are kind of not structured specifically, but how did you work with them?
That's a great question because I didn't address it in my presentation. So we really put in a lot of efforts to trying to get them to go to the places where they naturally go. So I also went to I took a whole day and reserved one of the benches in like a marketplace out in the open on a Sunday morning because I know they will be there. My retired people will be there. But even though we put up a whole sign that it's free, that you don't have to give us anything, there will be no charges, and we put a beautiful display of all the things that we are offering them for free to just take it right there and then. No one, we just got commentary while they passed by us oh no, I don't need that. Give us our youth back. Someone's gonna come and steal us. Who? The EU? Oh no, we're not gonna. So the trust level is really, really important to make some kind of connection. And after we have come to a few of the recipients, so a few registrations, then it kind of came to a snowball effect because word of mouth proved to be a great way of, in the first instance, gathering that trust. Because after, you know, uh, one person received this help and volunteers came to their house and they had a beautiful time with them. Besides helping with the technical stuff, I learned that they really, really appreciate just the time that you spend with them because they're lonely, socially excluded, and do not have many visitors because of the state of their home, because they're embarrassed or stuff like that. So after these few successful missions, we started getting more and more registries because people often recommended our service to their to someone in their neighborhood, so to their God, how do you say neighbors? And the second way of getting to more and more numbers, and this was a very, very big boom, was just one showing at the local, not local, really, national TV show called Good Morning Croatia. We had a slot of like 10 minutes. I just said we are offering this to these and these people. You have to be, you don't. So we had a few criteria to make sure that this stuff is really going to the households that really need it. So we did have a few criteria such as you have to be retired, you have to have a pension not bigger than, I think we put 400 euros, which is a big part of retirees here in Croatia. And a few more, you can or don't have to be recipients of some kind of social aid and stuff like that. And I just presented the kit, the energy efficiency kit. It was, I say, 10 minutes, and the phones didn't stop ringing for 2 whole days. We had more recipients than we could have managed. We did put them on a list that we will, through various other projects, and later on we will include them in our activities. So now we do have a large we do have a large data set of people who we can include in our projects that are now going on. But yes, we didn't anticipate it at all. So the phones really needed their own line for this amount of people who are calling. But yes, you just have to, all these efforts before, maybe 2% of what we have gathered through just this one show on the television. But to mention, we also did have, like, on other networks and on other shows that went on television, we did have our, presentation, and we also went into one household of a person who obviously gave their consent, and we talked to them, their experience, in hopes that this will somehow make the same effect, but it didn't. And this Good Morning show, because I think it's because it emits like early in the morning when they are when our target group is, sitting next to the television, sipping their coffee and planning to go somewhere. I don't know, but yes, this was the biggest impact.
Yeah, that's very interesting because that's this kind of learning by doing that some, let's say, marketing agency would be doing for their, let's say, customers or something. But indeed, there is you manage to identify where your target profiles would be and what kind of channels they would be using and so on. If you had been using Facebook, you could have reached maybe a different audience, and on TikTok that would have been also very
Oh
different.
no, yeah, retirement,
Yeah, no
no,
TikTok.
not
No,
the best way. But
yeah,
previously
I
we also went, Red Cross Initiative,
yeah, yeah.
Caritas, all the institutions that offer similar help, and they gathered their own, a network of people who are recipients of their, I don't know, so they have a social market where they offer free stuff. And there I came into contact with those people and nothing.
So
Very
you see,
interesting.
Paula, you have a face for television. Maybe that's the beginning of a new career. But
It seems
thank
like
you so
that.
much. It's really great to hear this example because we often think like we need in our work to think a little bit creatively. Like it happened to me quite recently. I needed to do a focus group, but that was like mission impossible. So I did not a complete focus group, but I went to the market and started to talk with people. But many said, "Oh, who are you? Are you? What are you going to sell me?" and so on. And that didn't really work. But I managed to speak to 20 of them, and that was already quite enlightening. Well, not like so rigorous, but I guess that. Still, for the purpose of the work that we were doing, that was already enough. But anyway, that's really the proof that we need to think out of the box and that our, let's say, social relation, our social infrastructure need also to be a little elastic in a way when we do the work that we do. And we cannot rely only on the people that we know. We need to be out and about as well. So it's also about our, let's say, social infrastructures such. Catherine, do you, you talked about many different things, also about like the fact that there might be some like more centralized or decentralized approach. Again, there is also some kind of elastic understanding of what is at stake. Neil was asking in the chat if the energy advice system in Scotland is less problematic, whatever that means, and fragmented as a result of its national level coordination. So do you see that like coherence brings clarity?
Yes, thank you for this. I was actually just writing my answer just in case we didn't have time. So I can only really comment on this from a personal opinion because we haven't done any sort of hard research around this question, but it's still definitely something that we should look at. And I really like this. So my personal opinion is that yes, the national level coordination, it really helps this coordination on the ground. It makes the sector more kind of networked. It makes it more kind of streamlined in many places. And in what they have in Scotland, which is really good for energy advice, is that it's nationally coordinated, but it's still locally delivered through a range of partners who know their communities really well. So everyone has their sort of area, and it just seems to kind of work a lot more effectively. But saying that, I have to caveat with that Scotland does still have really persistent fuel poverty, for lack of a better term, statistics. So again, this will need to be kind of looked at in more detail. But yeah, I think just from the interviews that we conducted, and we conducted over 65 interviews with stakeholders from across the UK, it seemed that they did always look towards the kind of the Scottish model for energy advice.
Yeah, that's interesting. This kind of advice also comes with some kind of training. We only have a few minutes, but I would be really interested in knowing whether, like, the coordination also comes from the way you support the social workers, like the workers. That would circle back to what Stefan was sharing at the very beginning. Like, how do you support the people who are making the difference on the ground? Is it something like Catherine that you've noticed Scotland is doing better than other contexts?
So it's a bit difficult to say in a short answer because there are sort of different systems of training and qualification across these different nations. But most energy advisors go through a sort of level 3 certificate in energy advice awareness, and that's very kind of much the same across the UK. You need to have that certificate in order to become an energy advisor. The problem really lies where they need additional additional training. And like I spoke about, the sort of fire safety, the domestic violence awareness, the mental health first aid, these are not included in your sort of general energy advisor training. So advisors have to do that on top of their own training. Some organizations, of course, they're providing that for their energy advisors and some aren't. And so what it's resulting in is this kind of a lot of energy advisors are having to take time to kind of advise on things that they're not necessarily equipped to deliver. And that's really problematic being an energy advisor, like they said in the quote, again, we're not social workers. This isn't their remit. There are kind of structures in place, or there should be structures in place, I should say. There were structures in place maybe in the past that have been eroded over time. And now people just don't know where to go to. And they're really lacking in this kind of supportive environment. And this is just feeding into the sort of the vulnerability, for lack of a better word, that they're experiencing. Thank you.
Yeah, I would refer to what is being done in France by the program called Les Slim, which is exactly this kind of bottom-up and top-down, with the really the energy, let's say, advisors work in partnership with the social workers, are also bringing like raising awareness on the kind of knowledge gaps that they may have. So that I was with them a couple of weeks ago. They have once a year this big gathering. But throughout the year, they do like 1 hour training or 2 hours training on specific topics. And I find it really, really interesting because like it's also good for, let's say, the advocacy. It's really good for like empowering them to cover more topics, because unfortunately they see that it's not only about the home, but it's also about what is challenging all above. So Neil, I will pass the floor to you, and afterwards I will give like the floor to Lynn for the concluding remarks, maybe. So Neil, only a few minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say, kind of echoing what Catherine mentioned there. One of the things I forgot to talk about, or I didn't have time to talk about in my presentation, all this stuff about energy advice, energy assistance. At the household level, it's all about social capital, right? So it's about giving people connections that enable them to kind of attain useful knowledge, useful information, technical expertise that they may not otherwise have access to. And in the research I did in the private rented sector, again, there was that sense that a lot of these support services, not only energy advice, but the kind of wider support infrastructure that Catherine alluded to around mental health, around housing, around all sorts of stuff, has basically been eroded because of austerity. So it just isn't there for people anymore. So you have a situation where people are left in a very kind of marginalized position because the social infrastructure that Stefan talked about just isn't there. And I had that quote up where kind of showed that energy advisor, where she basically admitted that sometimes she gives more time to people who are better able to kind of articulate themselves in certain kinds of ways. But I think that's also to understand that in context, that's also because she's very time pressured, right? And you have lots and lots of people and not actually very much kind of support there for them. So she has so many people, and you end up in those situations where you prioritize someone over someone else, right? Because fundamentally she can't deal with everyone. So yeah, it just basically what Catherine said and what Stefan said just really echoed with a lot of what I found as well.
Lynn, would you like to conclude?
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, indeed. Another fascinating session today. And thank you everyone for joining day 2 of GJO. And yeah, so don't forget to join us tomorrow for the next session, and we will continue exploring energy justice, and especially the global north, some hidden hardships and blind spots. So I hope to see you, so many of you there. And yeah, take care and have the nice rest of the day. See you tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.